So let's go to God in prayer this morning. God, we thank you for a chance just to worship you and just to focus on you. We thank you for your presence in our life. And we do lift up those who are struggling. We lift up those who are dealing with medical things, especially those who are dealing with things that just seem like they're ongoing and they're just not going away, and maybe it's just going to be the way it is. And I just pray that you would just give them just an extra measure of your sustaining grace and presence in their life. And then for those who are struggling in their job in some way, either they're underemployed or they're just not in the right place or something just needs to be different there, I just lift them up to you and just pray that you would guide them to the right place. And then, God, for all of us, as we just walk through life, and just help us to remember to celebrate the great things that come along and just trust you when things are tough. In Christ's name I pray, amen. So this morning, what I want to do is a little bit different than a typical sermon or message or whatever you call it, what I do on typical Sundays. But what I want to do is just share with you a little bit about what I've been up to for the last couple of months. Some of you have asked, our church's sabbatical policy, we actually have a written policy for sabbaticals. It requires staff who utilizes sabbaticals to write a written report to our alignment team, which I'll be doing. But I wanted to share some of that with you today as well. And I wanted to start off with a definition of a sabbatical. It's kind of hard to find a definition for our context. I went to the Oxford Dictionary, and it defines it this way, that it's a period of paid leave granted to a university teacher or other worker for study or travel, traditionally 1 year for every 7 years worked. That's more in an academic context. It doesn't really fit into the religious or the non-profit context, although if we ever consider updating our policy, I would like for us to consider that 1 year line right there. Just keep that in mind, right? But anyway, that wasn't very helpful. So I went to the internet sources of all internet sources, Urban Dictionary, right? And if you're not familiar with Urban Dictionary is kind of like Wikipedia. It's open source, so everybody gets to play, right? It's not usually all that helpful, but it's really entertaining. So this is Urban Dictionary's definition, what students who go to military school call it when they are academically suspended, right? So that's a sabbatical there. I don't think I was academically suspended or anything like that. So, but here's the definition that we use. It's straight out of our policy. It's simply a sabbatical allows for the pursuit of professional developing, mentoring, and physical and spiritual renewal. That's what a sabbatical is within this context. That's what we mean by sabbatical. And so I want to take those three categories and just break them up and let you know kind of how I spent my time, some of the things I did, some of the takeaways, some of the things I learned. And I want to start at the end and work my way up with physical and spiritual renewal. This is something that all of us need. I mean, God wired all of us to need spiritual and physical renewal, or physical and spiritual rest, right? We're all wired that way. I wish every company, every organization would give their employees some sort of extended time away to just be renewed and to be refreshed and to do some of the things that I got to do. I think our culture would be healthier. I think our communities, our families, our companies and corporations, our government, all of that would be healthier if we did that. And I know some of you have access to that. You've told me some of you have access to that at work in some way or another. Maybe not a 2-month extended period or a 1 year extended period, but you've got extra days that you get in the month, or you get extra time that you can take to do professional development and things like that. You should take advantage of that. You know, one of the churches that I attended while I was away, I had a conversation with a pastor, and I know this pastor a little bit because it's my parents' church in North Carolina. And so when I'm visiting them, I always go to church with my mom if I'm there over a Sunday. And so I know this pastor, and he's kind of coming to the end of his career. He's getting ready to retire in a couple of years. And so we talked about, what I was doing. I told him what I was doing. He said, "I think that's great." And I said, "Yeah, you should do one if you've never done one." And he said, "Well, our church actually has a sabbatical policy too." He said, "But I've never taken one because I just don't think I could be away for that long." And I was having a conversation with my mom on the way home about that, and I discovered that pastor's actually had a couple of heart attacks along the way, and that he's he's actually retiring a few years earlier than planned because of his medical conditions. And I thought maybe if he had taken some time for this right here, if he'd utilized the experience that was available to him, maybe things would have been different. I don't know. And maybe that's something unique to consider. Maybe your health in some way, your physical health, your relational health, your work health, your spiritual health, maybe it could use some rest and renewal in some way. John writes this to some followers of Jesus. He said, "Dear friend," he said, I pray that you may enjoy good health and that all may go well with you, even as your soul is getting along well." And then Jesus was talking about this same soul health that John was mentioning one time when he said this to all of us, and I think this is so helpful and so comforting. He said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened." Anybody weary and burdened? That just means tired and stressed. That means you're tired and you're just carrying a weight. And I think the last few years has not only wore most of us out, but I think it's put an extra measure of weight on our shoulders that maybe we don't even recognize is there. And he says, "And I will give you rest." He says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your soul." Where do you need to find rest? And what are you going to do to get that rest? One of the things that I did over the last couple of months was I took a personal retreat. And I've done this several times through the years. Some of our other staff have done this. I think it's a great thing to do. I spent 3 days at Eagle Eyrie Conference Center. Some of you have been to Eagle Eyrie before. It's in Lynchburg, Virginia. Here's a picture from pretty much where I was staying the whole time. It's a great, beautiful, scenic place to be there outside of Lynchburg. Eagle Eyrie is a conference center that's owned by Virginia Baptist Convention. And they've got a couple apartments, they're essentially Airbnbs, that they make available to pastors and other church staff free of charge, no charge at all, for them just to come and stay and do this kind of a thing. And so it was great because it was just a time for me where I just completely got away. I didn't even have Wi-Fi where I was staying. I did have my phone though, thank goodness. But it was just a focused time for me of reading and prayer and just contemplation, and it was sort of towards the end of this summer, so I was able to process a lot of what I had done and seen and heard and read and been a part of. So it was a great time. Mark Batterson's a pastor in D.C., down here in Washington, and one of the things that he says all the time, I've heard him say this many times, is this. He says, change of pace plus change of place equals a change in perspective. So what do you need a different or a new perspective on in your life? Make some time for that. Another thing that I did that helped renew me in several different ways was I just spent a lot of time with my family. And I was able to travel to North Carolina twice over the summer to visit my parents who live there. And some of you know my parents are 84 years old. My dad has some significant health issues that he's been battling for a number of years now. They continue to take their toll. Every time I see him, he's just a little bit further down the road there. And so when I visit them, they need a lot more support from me than they used to when I'm there. And that's not always restful. And some of you're there, right? Some of you are there with maybe your parents or with another family member or something like that. But I know that I have a very limited time with my dad. And so each visit, even if it's not particularly physically or emotionally restful, there's a renewal that's taking place in the relationship there. And I know that I'm going to look back one day and be so thankful that I was able to carve out the time and the energy to make that trip and to be there and to connect. Marcia and I were also able to spend a lot of time together, which was great. We both work full-time. Like I said, we've got 2 college students. Both were home doing college last year. We're busy. We're on the go. So having time together was great. She and I, we took a 17-day trip to Europe. We'd been planning and saving for this for several years. Actually, I think it turned out to be 16 days because we flew Air Canada. I won't say anything else about that, just that they just don't seem to have any idea how to get an airplane off the ground on time. Okay, just that, if at all, in some cases, and they certainly don't know how to get your bags to where they're supposed to be. By the way, anybody else traveled by air this summer? Yeah? Anybody planning to soon? I'd say don't unless you have to. I mean, let me tell you, we traveled to Europe back in 2019, and I was in Kenya. I went to Kenya back in 2020 in February, right before COVID hit. Let me tell you, everything has changed in the airline industry. They are swamped. They are overwhelmed. They are overworked and understaffed. I could not believe what I saw. And we experienced it all, from canceled flights to every flight we were on was delayed. Long lines, lost baggage. We had everything hit us all in one trip. But in spite of that, it was a great trip. We first visited Scotland because, well, Outlander and all right? I mean, if you can't go to Scotland, why not go to Scotland, right? But we did. We went to Scotland. It got a lot better 4 days later when our bags actually did show up in Scotland. But we went from there to Northern Ireland, and we've been to Northern Ireland a couple of times. Some of you know that Marcia, my wife, which if you don't know who Marcia, my wife is, she's sitting right back here at the MacBook waving at you right now. Some of you don't know who she is, but anyway, that's her. Anyway, you know, she's into genealogy. She does a lot of genealogy research on our family. She's done it for years. She's done extensive research. We've traveled to Ireland a couple times just for her to do that, and that's why we were there pretty much, so that she could spend some time in their National Public Records Office just scanning over handwritten documents that had been scanned in onto microfilm. Remember microfilm? Just looking, you know, either tracking down a lead or hoping to find a new lead. So that was a great part. But the highlight of our trip was our last 6 days. We were in Denmark, mostly in Copenhagen, but in Denmark, because about a year and a half ago, I got an email from a guy named Kim, who lives in Copenhagen, and he had tracked me down through a Google search. He was a genealogy researcher himself, and he'd come across our names, and he tracked me down through a Google search, found our church's website, found my email address on our church's website under our staff page, and emailed me. He said, "I'm not sure if I've got the right person or not, but I think your wife is related to my wife, and so I just wanted to reach out and touch base to see with you if that's the case." It turns out that Kim is into genealogy as much, if not more, than Marcia is. And his wife, Hella, and Marcia are second cousins once removed. So Marcia's great-grandmother and Hella's grandmother were sisters. And Marcia remembers her mom talking about Nanny writing letters back. When she immigrated to New York, she'd write letters back to her sister. She grew up hearing these stories. They had all those letters. She was able to sit in their kitchen with these letters spread out across their table, and her and Kim just having a blast doing it. So when we got that email, we emailed him back and said, "Hey, we're planning on coming as soon as things open up and we can get there." So he started immediately. He's a doctor. He's a surgeon, a urologist. He takes a month off in the summer. So he planned the entire thing out, and I think he showed us almost the entire country of Denmark. Right, which is not very big. It's about 2.5 times smaller than Virginia. I think it's about the size of New Jersey or something like that. But he did. We spent all kinds of time with him traveling all over the place. And by the way, the next time you want to complain about how much everything costs here, they're paying $9 a gallon for gas in Denmark. And when they buy a car, I was shocked. They pay 150% tax on the value of that car. So you take the car's cost and add 150% to it, and that's what you got. They raised eyebrows when they discovered we had 4 cars. They couldn't get their minds around that at all. It's like, they're cheaper here. But anyway, Marcia got to visit some churches with Kim that her 4th and 5th great-grandparents were born in and baptized in and died in and were buried at. So it was a great trip. Here's a picture of Marcia and Kim standing out in front of one of those churches. Yeah, but one of the things that was most interesting about our time there in Denmark was the conversations that I was able to have with Kim and his family about religion and about faith. This is a picture of Kim's son. This would be Marcia's second cousin or third cousin. So Kim's son and his wife and their kids. We spent a couple of days out on the coast, which is about an hour from Copenhagen, at the family's country home. So this couple, they're in their late 20s. They're just starting their family, and they had a ton of questions for me about faith and church. in America, they watch a lot of American TV and a lot of American movies, so they know that religion and faith in church and all that is a big deal here. They had a hard time getting their minds around me being a priest, right? Which was their only connection, right? And I tried to explain to them as much as I could. I wasn't a priest, and what I was, I just finally gave up and said, sure, just call me Father if you want to. They didn't do that. But they also couldn't understand the way we do church. I mean, as many different ways I tried to explain. I tried to paint them a picture for what church looked like here. They just couldn't get their minds around it. And here's why. And his daughter-in-law told me, I mean, they have a ton of churches in Denmark, and they're beautiful. And they're well-kept and well-maintained, all of them that we were in, and we were in a lot. And they range from medium-sized to large to pretty large. But here's the deal. And she told me, she's like, we don't really go to church here. She's like, nobody really goes to church in Denmark. I don't know why, she said. I really don't know why. And she was just thinking that through with some of the things I was telling her about our connection with church and how we do church and how it's a sense of community and gathering and all of that. I mean, you pretty much have the state church in Denmark. That's pretty much all you have. There's a few independent churches, but not many. It's the Church of Denmark. It's actually Lutheran, but it's supported financially by the state. It's autonomous in terms of governing itself and all of that. And people, essentially, if they go Christmas and Easter, and they don't even go much around Christmas and Easter. A large part of the population don't. Most of Kim's family didn't go to church at all, even though they would consider themselves Christian and religious people. But here's the thing that really kind of made me think deeply about some of those conversations that I had. Denmark is considered one of the happiest countries in the world. And depending on which study you read, they rank somewhere with number 2. I think Finland might be number 1 at this point. Norway, I'm not sure. I think it's Finland. But they're definitely in the top 5 of what's considered the happiest countries in the world. And here's a country where people experience a huge sense of happiness and contentment, yet they have very, very little connection to faith. And the idea of God being a part of your life on a daily basis, it's a completely foreign idea to most of them, at least the people that I had conversations with. Now, there's a lot of reasons for their happiness and contentment. It's a country that has a great national unity. They don't have the political divisions that we have here. We talked about that. There's not a lot of racial tension there at all. They don't have the history that we have when it comes to race and racism and all. Their standard of living is pretty high for just about everyone. It's good for just about everyone. They have paid health care, paid education, all the way up through university. They pay a lot in taxes, especially for cars. But so I'm not saying that their lack of religious involvement is what makes them happy or content. But it did make me think about that connection of faith and how is the church in America doing in that area of helping people find a sense of joy and contentment in their lives. And I think the church in America has some work to do there. But that's a sermon for a whole another series. But the reason I tell you that is because this trip for me, it wasn't just a fun vacation to Europe. It was about reflection. It was about renewal. It was about allowing God to work in my life in some way and give me some spiritual insight that I need on some level. So value your family. Whatever your family looks like, value the time that you have with the people that you have the most. When you do that, there's a renewal that will take place in your life that you just can't get anywhere else. The other purpose of sabbatical is mentoring. Mentoring and I took the opportunity to spend time with other pastors, with some friends. Some of them I would call mentors. Others I would just call encouragers. And I think everyone needs both. Everyone needs people who are further along than them in life in some way, in their relationships, in their career, whatever it is. We all need people in our lives who are in a later season than we are, who can come along and give us some wisdom and some input and some perspective on the current season that we're in. In fact, Solomon tells us this in Proverbs 27. He says, "As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another person." Through the years, I've had a wide variety of mentors in my life who've just helped me be better. I mean, a better pastor, a better leader, a better boss, a better husband, father, a friend, whatever it is. And I've valued the extra time that I've had over the last couple of months to spend some time with some of those people. And so my question is, who do you have in your life like that? Who do you have in your life that's further along than you in some way, that you've given some permission to step into and to give you some input and share their wisdom and experience with you? Ecclesiastes 4 says this, that two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up, but pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Also, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? And though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves, and a cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. Mentors and encouragers, we all need both of those because they make our life better, but they also make us better at life. And then finally, my sabbatical, it included some professional development. And this was done in several ways. I went in with a list of books and podcasts that I hope to read and get through. It was a large list, and I knew I wouldn't get through nearly all of it. But it's an 8-hour drive to my parents' house in North Carolina, and then an 8-hour drive back, and I did that twice. So I had a lot of time in the car by myself to get through a lot of audiobooks and podcasts, which is what I love to do when I'm driving by myself. And that's something I don't get to do nearly as much as I would like to throughout the year in any given typical week, because there's just so many other things just kind of pulling me in and fighting for my time. So sabbatical definitely helped with that. One of the books that I read, and I highly recommend this to anyone who's in any kind of leadership position, was a book called Canoeing the Mountains. It's about Lewis and Clark and their expedition ended up taking them across the Rocky Mountains. It's Canoeing the Mountains, and the tagline is Christian Leadership in Uncharted Territory. We're in uncharted territory, right? No matter what industry you're in, it's uncharted these days. And even though this book, it's written specifically for leadership in the church, it has so many applications for those of you who lead in the corporate world, in nonprofits, or in any kind of government agency. So if that's you, you might want to check it out. I also visited several churches for worship, had some really great worship experiences. A couple of them still do that thing where they make you stand up and greet each other and talk to each other and stuff like that. And those of us who are introvert hate that. I'm so glad we don't do that here. But anyway, I survived. But one of the things about being at another church that did for me, and I've shared this with you before, is that it reminded me of what it's like to be a first-time guest in a church. And I was attending some of the churches, most of the churches, not all of them, but most churches, I would say, I was attending, I knew somebody. I either knew the pastor or somebody on staff, or I had a family member in that church or something like that. And it was still a bit intimidating to walk into that church that I don't attend on a regular basis. And think about that. I mean, I'm a pastor, right? I mean, I've been doing this for over 30 years. I've got a master's degree in church, okay? But there was something that made me nervous about attending a church that I hadn't been to for the first time. And I think that should make all of us want to just go out of our way every Sunday to make our guests feel welcome here, to make them feel comfortable and at home, and just to meet their needs. I think that should be every one of our number one priority every Sunday morning. By the way, we desperately need people to help us with our hospitality ministry, our greeters, our snacks, our coffee, all of that stuff. So you might want to consider signing up for that team. We'd love to have you. The other thing I did in this professional development category, and I'll wrap it up with this, is I just poured over all of the information, the reports, the data from our strategic planning discovery process, and there's a ton of it to go over. I connected with our consultant several times. His name is Rich Hurst. Some of you have met Rich. And by the way, Rich is one of those people, we've worked with him for several years, and I've got to know him through the years. He used to, when he lived closer, used to fill in for me when I would be out of town a lot. Rich is one of those encouragers in my life. I mean, every time I walk away from a coffee or a lunch or a phone call or a Zoom call with Rich, I just feel better. I just feel better about me and about any situation that I'm in or anything. He's an incredible guy with an incredible incredible story. And I don't have time to go over all of the reports from the TCI and from the focus groups that Rich did a couple of months ago, and the reports that he's put together for us. Like I said, there's a ton of information in them. We're going to be getting that to you in a couple of weeks in the form of a couple of PDFs. They'll be linked in the newsletter in a couple of weeks, so look for those. And then we're going to have an all-church meeting in a few weeks, probably on a Sunday afternoon or evening, where we're just going to go over it all together and take questions and answers and just map out the next few steps and do a little bit of prayer around all of that. So don't miss that when we get there. But here are the highlights from the report. First of all, here's what's going well. This is what you said in the TCI and in the focus groups. First one was finances, and let me explain that just a little bit, because that doesn't mean we've got lots of money, right? What that means is you either understand the finances or you trust the leadership that are handling the finances, and when you look at our church, you say, we don't spend it on extravagant things, that we use our resources, we steward them well. That's what that means right there. Involvement. This is essentially creating ways for people to be involved in the mission of the church, to be part of something that's bigger than them. You said we're doing that pretty well. Outreach. This is more specifically having an impact on our community, whether it's outreach, inviting people to church, or actually going out and helping to serve within our community and with the world in general. And then families, and this relates to our kids and our student ministries. You said we're doing those things well. Here are some of our challenges. Here are some of our challenges and our opportunities to spend some time and some work on the pandemic trauma. We've talked about that a good bit over the last several months, what that means for our church and the church in general. But we recognize that, and so we need to figure out what do we do to move past that and deal with that. Worship, we've got some opportunities here. We went for months where we weren't meeting together, where we were all online, and then we went even longer where a lot of you weren't able to be back even when we started in person. So as we start coming back together in person and online together, what does that look like? What does the online experience need to look like? How can we do that better and engage people better online? What does the in-person experience need to look like? What does the new normal look like for worship moving forward? And then learning. This relates to equipping people for just doing life and doing life as a follower of Jesus. This is connected to our small groups specifically, and so how do we do that better? How do we equip small group leaders themselves to do a better job of leading their groups? How do we recruit new small group leaders and train them to do that? How do we engage people back into small groups? Because again, small groups, as we've said, was somewhat decimated by COVID. And so how do we rebuild that so the learning can continue to excel? And then vision. And essentially around vision, you said, it's not that the church doesn't have vision, it's just we don't know what it is. We don't know what it is, and we don't know where we fit into it and how we can help to move that vision forward. So how do we begin to communicate that out? How do we begin to, again, bring people into that so they know where they fit and where they can help move that vision forward? And then leadership, and this is a lot about knowing who leadership is and trusting leadership as we move into that uncharted territory. And again, all of this relates back to that first one, that pandemic trauma, when we weren't together and we kind of lost some connections with each other. So there's been a lot of change there, a lot of things that we can work on. So that's the highlights. Like I said, in a few weeks, we're gonna have an all-church meeting where we can go over them in more detail, take questions and answers, comments, suggestions, all of that stuff, and map out the next steps in our strategic planning process, and then pray around all of that. But here's what I want to say about our strategic planning and our strengths and our challenges, and then we'll wrap this up. But we're going to need this year and in the years to come, more than anything else, we're going to need people who are not just willing to volunteer. We're going to need people to lead. We're going to need people to step into leadership roles to help lead us into the uncharted territory that we have before us. We like every church I visited, every church where I had coffee or lunch with their pastor over the past few months, we have some significant challenges, and they are challenges, but they're also opportunities. But they're challenges, and we need people to help lead us through them. I'll close with this quote. It's from the book I mentioned, Canoeing the mountains. And here's what he writes. He says, leadership is not authority. Leadership is not authority. It's not a title or a position that a person holds. Leadership is different from management. Leadership is not running good meetings, keeping good books, overseeing good programs, and making good policies, as important as all those things are, he says. Management cares for what is. Leadership is focused on what can be or what must be. Management is about keeping promises to a constituency. Leadership is about an organization fulfilling its mission and realizing its reason for being. That's the kind of people that the church needs now more than ever. Helping us see what can or what should be and fulfilling our mission and our reason for being here to begin with. So when you have an opportunity to lead, when you're invited to lead over the next months and years, when you have an opportunity, when you see an opportunity to step in over the next few months or years, say yes and help us figure all of this out and help us fulfill the mission that God has given to us. I'll say this, and then I'm finished, but thank you for the gift of sabbatical. Thank you for allowing me some time to rest after some difficult, challenging years, with some difficult, challenging years ahead of us. Thank you for the time to experience physical and relational and spiritual renewal, and for the time to get some much-needed professional development as we get ready to move forward. Let me pray for you. God, thank you for this day. And I thank you for this past month that you've given to me and the rest and renewal. And I pray that everyone in this room over this summer was able to carve out some time or figure out a way to get some rest and renewal in some area of their lives themselves. And God, for those that are just really struggling and need that now more than ever, I pray that they would find it in some way. And then, God, I thank you for this church. I thank you for the process that we're on. I thank you for the information that we've gathered in our discovery process. I thank you for the strengths that we identified that are still strengths, even after all that we've been through. And then, God, I thank you for these challenges and these opportunities that we have to learn about ourselves and to grow and to do things differently or better or whatever that might look like. I just thank you for that opportunity, and I pray that you would just guide us as we move into a new year, as we move into a new season, that you would just give us everything we need to do that well. In Christ's name I pray. Amen.